We've now reached chapter 7 of John's Gospel, and it concerns Jesus going up to the Feast of the Tabernacles. Chapter 7. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee, purposely staying away from Judea because of the Jews that were waiting to take his life. But when the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "You ought to go, leave here, and go to Judea, so that your disciples may see the miracles that you do. Nobody who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world." For even his own brothers did not believe in him. And therefore Jesus told them, "The time for me has not yet come. For you, any time is right. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that what it does is evil. You go to the feast. I am not yet going up to the feast, because for me the right time has not yet come." Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the feast, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now at the feast of the Jews were watching for him. Now at the feast the Jews were watching for him and asked, "Where is that man?" Amongst the crowd there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, "He's a good man." Others replied, "No, he deceives the people." But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the Jews. So here we have an event which is sometime after the previous event. We're not told exactly when. The Feast of the Tabernacles took place at a certain time, and it's one of those feasts which most Jewish people would go go up to Jerusalem in order to celebrate. And Jesus was purposely staying around away from Judea because the Jews were waiting there to take his life. Now, that's not surprising, considering the things that he had been saying. It was the equivalent of blasphemy, and we even know in our day, in certain religions, if you say certain things or treat the holy book in a certain way, you could be accused of being blasphemous, and the consequences of that are quite dire in these kind of primitive societies where blasphemy is treated as the kind of capital punishment. Or a crime deserving capital punishment. And so Jesus had said things, the things which we've seen already, that he came down from heaven, that he is one with God, that he is the bread of life that came down from heaven, that unless you eat his flesh and drink his blood, you don't have any part in him, you don't have eternal life. And these are the kind of statements, particularly the one where he said he came down from heaven, which had engendered people to accuse him of blasphemy. They'd also accused him of lawlessness because he had healed a man on the Sabbath day and told him to pick up his mat and walk. And anyone who would deliberately encourage someone to pick up their mat and walk, thus breaking the Sabbath or the rules of the Sabbath, could not possibly be a holy man from God. He must be someone who was not godly in any way, shape or form. Otherwise, he would indeed have obeyed the Sabbath law. Such is the argument and such is the case against Jesus. So the Jews were waiting there to see this person who was considered a blasphemer and someone who was against the things of God, because they would have killed him, maybe stoned him to death, or some other form of punishment like crucifixion. They were waiting to take his life. But when the Jewish Feast of the Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "You ought to leave here and go to Judea, so that your disciples may see the miracles that you do." No one wants to become a public figure in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world. Because even his own brothers did not believe in him. Now this is a perplexing passage and difficult for us to understand. First of all, let's be clear about who his brothers were. We're talking here about the half-brothers of Jesus. This is, without doubt, the term which is used here, adelphos. The idea is that these are the relatives of Jesus, the half-relatives. These would be the children of Mary and Joseph. And there are listed people who are the brothers of Jesus, James and Joses and others who are his brothers listed in the Bible. And these brothers did not believe in him, it says here. They didn't believe in him. So these words which we see spoken by them, where they said, you ought to go and leave here and go to Jerusalem, Judea, so that your disciples may see your miracles. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret, and since you're doing these things, show yourself to the world. Those words which are being said, on the face of it, appear to be encouraging words, words to go out, make a name for yourself, and show your miracles to others. But the fact that this is appended, for even his own brothers did not believe in him, that suggests that these words were said ironically, or maybe even sarcastically to him. They didn't believe in his ministry. They didn't believe that he deserved to be a public figure. They didn't believe that he should go around teaching in these things. They didn't believe his cause as the Messiah. They didn't believe who he claimed to be. Interesting that the people closest to Jesus did not believe him. And in fact, the other thing which I think you can draw from this is that so that your disciples may see the miracles that you do. So they didn't believe the miracles either. Interestingly enough, why would they not believe the miracles? After all, they're very close by. I think that the conclusion you can come to here, or the conclusion I would come to here, is that they'd probably never seen the miracles that Jesus had done. I think once you see a miracle, there's something there which demands an explanation. But what I'm guessing is that they had heard reports of miracles, that they had not actually been present at the time of the miracles which have been reported, that they weren't there when the man was healed at the pool, that they weren't there when the loaves and the fish were divided up, and probably weren't even there at the wedding at Cana. Though why that should be, I wouldn't know, because it might have been a family event. But even so, there is clearly doubt in their minds about Jesus' ministry and the signs and proof that Jesus had offered. Now, does that cause us a problem? Does it help us to understand the situation better? No, I think that there is a clear psychological understanding of what's going on here. These are typical brothers, typical family, and in any family you find jealousies and rivalry. Particularly there are rivalries within maybe the youngest in a family, who often gets favoritism, or the oldest in the family, who gets all the precedence, who gets the entitlements, who, a bit like Joseph, was looked upon as the person who they didn't like because he was the one who was cleverest, the most able, the one who spoke in words which often they didn't understand, was apart from them in many ways, seemed to be more of an outsider to the family than being just an ordinary member of it. I would guess that this is the kind of dynamics which is going on. And there's a familiarity here which breeds a contempt. Yes, they heard the words of Jesus, but they didn't understand it or understand them. And they heard reports of miracles. They knew that he had the power to go out and talk to people and command crowds. Yes, but they took that for granted, like members of a family. I remember hearing Paul McCartney say that he would often sit and strum his guitar at home, and the family would say, "Oh, shut up, Dad, stop playing that guitar." When I suppose most of the people in the world would be very happy to sit and hear the famous Paul McCartney sing and play to them. There's a kind of familiarity which breeds contempt when you're so close to people that you can't see the wood for the trees. And here, I would guess, they'd heard reports of miracles, and they thought to themselves, it's just exaggeration. None of this could be true. We haven't seen any of this with our own eyes. So they doubted Jesus, they doubted his ministry, and no doubt there were family rivalries and jealousies maybe behind part of this approach. This is not an unusual phenomenon, and Jesus himself comments upon it in another place where he says that a prophet has no honour in his own town or county or country. And that's true then as it is today, and how familiarity is something which enables us to discount those things which are closest to us. You see it in many little facets in life. Very often people might be promoted in a job because they come from outside. It's very hard for someone maybe inside, because people know you so well, to be promoted up the ladder when people come from outside and are promoted above you or given jobs above you. I'm sure that's quite a common experience for many people. And as a consequence of that, it's a bit of this effect which is working here, that familiarity breeds contempt. So his own brothers did not believe in him for the reasons which I think I've stated here, which is quite common and to be expected. Therefore Jesus told them, "The time for me has not yet come." Remember, they're goading him to go up. And in goading him to go, probably knew full well that it might precipitate an attack by the authorities, and something which might lead to him being brought down a peg or two as far as they were concerned, if not being put an end of as well. The time has not yet come for you, any time is right. Again, this is the kind of statement which Joseph might make to his brothers, where Joseph was clearly a cut above the brothers and had virtues, abilities, talents beyond them, and led to jealousy, favoritism by the father, which also led to jealousy too. And all of those kinds of things were things which do not lead brothers to look kindly even upon the Son of God, or especially upon the Son of God. You can go any time because you are ordinary people, whereas for me, the time has not yet come. I work on a celestial, spiritual timetable which is planned out for me over the next few years, of which you know nothing about. You don't have the same mission that I have, and therefore you can go whenever you like. However, when I go, I quite expect it to be an occasion when my life will be taken from me by the powers which are facing me. And knowing that as a fact beforehand, I will choose the point when I go there publicly and even provoke the authorities to do such a thing within my time scale, within my time frame, and not within yours. For you, it makes no difference. For me, it does. Because, well, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify that what it does is evil. It cannot hate you. Why, therefore? Because you do not testify that what the world does is evil. You do not rile and antagonize those around you. You do not oppose the religious forces of your day like I do. You do not call out truth against the powerful influences of those in charge like I do. And consequently, people don't care about you, they ignore you. Nothing could come of your presence there. But I make a stand against the evil practices that I see, against the ritualism, against the excesses, against the debaucheries, against all the fake religiousness which abounds within Israel. I call it out, and as a consequence, I am attacked for it, quite expectedly. You go to the feast. I'm not yet going up to the feast. Some early manuscripts don't have the word yet in it. In other words, you go to the feast, I'm not going up to this feast. Some people have argued that you have to have the word yet in there, because if you didn't, Jesus would be saying, I'm not going up to the feast, when in fact he did. And there would therefore be a contradiction between Jesus' words and Jesus' actions. I'm not going to go up, and then he goes up. That would cause us with a problem, because it would mean that Jesus was not totally honest or above board or truthful. And if that was the case, then that would call into question his whole veracity and nature, which is why you have the word yet in there. But the earliest manuscripts didn't have yet in them. That doesn't mean, of course, that even if the word yet is not in there, that doesn't mean that Jesus would have been dishonest in saying, I'm not going up to the Feast of the Tabernacle. Because there's an implication in those words that the time is not right to publicly proclaim myself, and so I'm not going to go up with the aim of what you have suggested that I do. I'm not going to go up there for that reason. And I think that within the context of what is being said, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to go up there for that reason. You've told me to go up and to make a name for myself. And because public figures don't act in secret, show yourself to the world. And Jesus says, my time's not yet come, and therefore I'm not going to go up to the feast, certainly for that reason. The implicit idea being that I'm not going to go and declare myself. I'm not going up to the feast to declare myself in the way in which you have just set out. So I don't really think there's a problem with the word yet or not, even if the word yet is not in there. The implication here is very clear. I'm not going up to the feast to proclaim myself in the way in which you have tried to goad me to do so. But for the time is not yet right. The time has not yet come. So, having said this, he stayed in Galilee. But as the emphasis then is not upon the going up or the not going up, the emphasis is upon the declaring yourself publicly or not declaring yourself publicly. I'm not going up to do that public declaration. That makes sense, and that I think is the clear context of the passage here. So, having said this, he stayed in Galilee because he did plan to go up, but in secret. After his brothers had left for the feast, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. So, when he says I'm not going up, he means I'm not going up publicly, I'm going up secretly. Now, at the feast, the Jews were watching for him and asking, where is the man? Why were they watching for him? Well, we're told that at the start. They were waiting there to take his life. And this would have been the point at which the crucifixion would have taken place if Jesus had allowed that to occur. But he'd already got a plan in mind that he was going to go up there publicly and proclaim his messiahship in the most public way possible, already in not at this time, but at the time of his choosing, which would coincide not with the Feast of Tabernacles, but with the Passover, which would give infinitely more meaning to the death that he was about to face. But the point here is that he knew. When he says, my time has not yet come, and when he says, my time is now come, he means it's the time for him to die, the time for me to surrender myself to the authorities, the time for me to stand up against those authorities in a public way and to be destroyed by them, to offer myself up for the world. He's already spoken about that in the last chapter. And now that is the time he's speaking of here. Amongst the crowd there was widespread whispering about him. Some said he's a good man. Others said no, he deceives the people, in the way in which we've said. He deceives them because he doesn't keep the Sabbath, those kind of things, because he claims incredible things that he's come down from God. But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the Jews. In other words, very much like any closed society where open speech is discouraged, shall we say. And in such a closed society, people are afraid to speak their minds. There are many closed societies and there are many open societies, though increasingly the open society is less prevalent these days. An open society is one where any man or any woman or any person can express their views publicly without fear of recrimination about any topic whatsoever. A closed society is one where you cannot voice your own opinion without fear of persecution or being cast out of your job or being stoned or being vilified or being cancelled in some way. We've moved ourselves, and we take an impression of this, in this country and in America and in many other places around the world in the West, which we consider ourselves to be an open society. We've slowly but surely moved into becoming a closed society. So now that you cannot say certain things or believe certain things or voice certain opinions, which would run counter to the natural narrative, without people claiming that you should be cancelled, that your publishing company would close your books down, that your company should sack you and remove you from your job, that the police might award a hate crime notification against you in some respect, even though there's no crime available. There's all kinds of pressures on society. And it was one such society that the Jews found themselves in. It was a closed society, a society where you couldn't voice your own opinion without danger of recrimination. We need to avoid that kind of society ourselves if we can, but seemingly we haven't been able to avoid it now as we move more and more into a coercive situation.